to improve that interpretation, I vote more plan.
Can I sort of carry on from that one? You say it is down to interpretation. I would agree enormously. I mean, I have considerable experience, and some people know who I probably know who I'm talking about, but I won't name names, of one particular conservation officer who's got a very, very specific point of view on what he likes and what is suitable, which isn't often what even the neighbours think or the architect may think, but if you don't comply, you get a report saying no, and it's nothing to do with nuisance or talks or any of the other reasons for the planning system, and there's an awful lot of that about. There's an awful lot of case officers who frankly say, well, I don't know whether I like it or not, or whether I'm going to help it, and I'll listen to what you say, but I've got to check it with my case of my team leader. And you think, what are they there for? They can't make decisions. You know, the system. I'm sympathetic on the whole to the principle of the system, but it's the way it runs at the moment is sometimes great. You've got a good example. Sometimes, more often, what are they doing? And by the way, your wraparound block extension was built because it complied with the permitted development rules as they were written to make this planning system supposedly work. The Victorians, of course, would have simply put another story on it, wall straight up. Looks much better. You can't get permission for it anymore. Believe me, I've tried. The horrid box on the roof is probably the greatest damning factor of the whole current system. Because they're there, because they comply with what they're the only thing that will get passed. And they're a mess. And we know they're a mess. And I have to tell clients, we can only build you an ugly box because anything else will get refused. I'm not allowed to do what I would like to do. Put another story on that.
Permitted development is the current 2008 version. Is that right? 2008. That's a clear example of where there should be a more expansive rule-based document. At the moment, is that all the boroughs don't seem to be agreed that the retraction of the percentage-based ground floor extension for a series of distances from side and rear extensions was, I think, supposed to be progressive and fairer for people with smaller houses having an equally sized extension, but seems to have got itself in a right muddle. Certainly, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, I don't know what Enfield are doing about it, but they're saying you can't, in a Victorian or a Georgian closet wing, you can't do an infill extension, which has got to be the least obtrusive to your neighbour. So you end up with a sort of just an extension of the closet wing that looks clumsy, and with a little bit more clarification, maybe a few more sentences in the relevant document, that would be sorted out.
What I think is quite. I just want to put this out there because it's quite something going on in my head quite soon. Something you said about how you ensure good design. First of all, I want to tell a little story. I have a friend who I studied my Part 1 architecture with. She decided after she'd done her Part 1 that she was kind of tired with the fact that she had little control over what built or what design she could get away with, and all her imagination was going into waste. So she decided to go to the other side, and she switched to planning masters. And it was quite interesting because I lived with her for the year she was doing planning masters, so we could do a lot of cross-pollination of ideas. And I took a couple of modules and myself. You know, one of the modules was anticipating actor networks and dealing with corruption, which I thought was quite interesting. Why you need a module planning, but so she became a planner, and she tried to get a job in several development control around the northeast, and no one would give her a job. There were jobs there, no one would give her a job. You'd think someone who wants to protect quality of design would snap up someone with Part 1 in architecture. She would go work for development control. She ended up working for Turley Associates in Leeds, and she basically spends most of her time now getting Aldi supermarkets through planning, through learning exactly what is required, bare minimum, to get a corrugated steel box on an out-of-town brownfield development site just past, nudging right through, and that's what she does. So the interesting thing for me from the Part 1 point of view is when I was first starting to study architecture, there was a big focus of attention on Amsterdam and areas of regeneration around Amsterdam, and a lot of the kind of work we were encouraged to look at for inspiration and for foresight was some of the regenerative dockland areas around there. And I thought, well, inner city developments as well, a lot of work by MRTPI on ACArch or Glasgow. But a lot of the type of architecture that in the early 2000s that architects used were aspiring to was coming out of Amsterdam and places like Copenhagen and Sweden and Northern European countries. And I looked at, I did a little bit of research on the planning system in Amsterdam. It's quite interesting because all people who work for planning authorities and development control, or their equivalent of development control, have to have Part 1, or the Dutch equivalent of Part 1, before they can even become a planner. So I wonder whether there is a clue to how we might protect design in there. I'm not saying that I know that there's proof that that is, but it seems that there's something going on when somebody with Part 1 can't get a job in development control in this country, and you have to have it in another. You might.
I think in terms of, from sitting within a local planning authority for a number of years, I can openly accept that planners don't know enough about design in terms of, so in terms of people that are qualified to talk specifically about design. The role of the planners, the role of a planner has frequently become the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to interpret sort of conclusions of technical reports and things. So there's a huge project management element to it, as well as understanding the impacts of certain developments. So asking the right questions, pushing the right buttons, and sort of suggesting, well, throwing things back and saying, well, there's this problem with this. It doesn't. I think one of the problems with the planning system is that there's too much of trying to copy what's there, or too much sort of pastiche stuff going on, or stuff that's meant to be pastiche that couldn't really even pass as pastiche because it's actually so bad a copy in the first place. So there should be more things that are positive in terms of design. That the development you've talked about a few times was sort of traditional buildings surrounding it, but a very modern development, modern design. And the idea there is that most authorities don't go far enough in that respect. I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that. Obviously, there is a greater need for experience of design. I think there's a greater need for people with dual skill sets to work within authorities and guide things. We used to have a qualified architect that became a conservation officer at my old authority, and it was a very useful sort of sitting in on a major applications meeting or something like that. You just got a different perspective to it than you might get from the rest of the people around the table. And I think one of the aims of planning is to try and reconcile those different perspectives in the aim of creating something better.
Any of the other non-architects something to add? Because I can't see the engineers. So
Go on, Martin.
I probably keep thinking of anything.
Martin's usually got enough to say.
Yeah, I don't want to sound foolish. I'm also an architect. I suppose one of the things that I kind of find quite frustrating with planning is going back to kind of Phil's idea of interpretation. I mean, I was chatting to geologists today doing contaminated land science, it's a real problem. One of the things that he was saying with the kind of planning proposals is a real problem is PPS 23, which was kind of very kind of, it's like a 4 or 5 page kind of explanation of what you shouldn't do. Like the new planning procedures are trying to shrink things down, and PPS 23 is being shuffled out the door, and it's coming down to like 2 or 3 sentences, which massively leaves things open to interpretation. One of the frustrating things I found with planning is interpretation on technical things like that. Local authorities have got absolutely no real idea of it, because a planning officer is somebody who's purely there to check boxes, to tick boxes, and when they don't have any kind of understanding of what they're trying to tick boxes, it kind of gets more complicated.
Not sure why I invited you, Martin.
Having never ticked a box. Anyway. In respect to, I take on your point, so PPS 23, PPG 24, noise is mentioned 3 times in the NPPF, the word, that's it. Whereas PPG 24 talks about what actually is noise, and it breaks down sort of quite complex subject into something that's easy for planners to understand, which is noise exposure categories. So it gives it some nice A, B, C and D and what we should do in those circumstances. Obviously PPS 23 provides a lot of guidance on pollution. There is a difficulty with the planning system at the moment that if the draft NPPF goes ahead along the lines proposed, and certainly the objections from all the environmental groups are that it shouldn't because it lacks all of this depth, there will be a big hole. Certainly one of my concerns is that people will spend the first day of the public inquiry arguing about how we should consider something instead of just considering it as we would have done it in line with the national guidance. I think in reality something will come forward to plug that gap, either the Environment Agency. If the government take the view that the NPPF isn't going to change and isn't going to fill that gap and doesn't want to produce any guidance, then I think hopefully the Environment Agency will do so, given that they wrote most of PPS 23 and I imagine parts of PPG 24. So there